So let's have a look at this other scenario. Pawn takes, queen takes, knight c3 check, bishop e2 and bishop g4 is met by d4, bishop takes, knight takes, and now queen e6, d5. What happens after queen d7? To make an example, white is much better after bishop f4. Again, we have a pawn in d5. We still have our idea of knight d4 in case of c6. Our knight is keeping an eye on this pawn, but in this case you may argue that black can try to develop through fianchetto. G6, our best move now is queen to d2, simply developing the queen, bishop g7, and now white castles alongside, and it looks like the black player managed to play an still a silly defense, but still maybe somewhat a normal game. After knight f6, white continues with knight g3, and after castling, black has played everything that was necessary for this to be considered a normal game. But white has an advantage after playing bishop to h6, forcefully swapping the bishop, because if the bishop retreats, then we win the exchange, and if black does something else, then we take the bishop. If bishop takes us, then taking back, and then we have an idea of playing h4, h5, sacrificing everything on this file. We've got a knight, we've got a rook, and this is going to be very hard for black to stop. So after bishop h6, black's best move is c6, and now we swap bishops. King takes back, and now we go on with d6. Of course, taking will be bad, because after a bunch of swaps, the knight can develop, and we've achieved nothing. The best move now is d6, in order to secure us the control of the open file. White is much better after taking the pawn and allowing the other rook into the game. Black's best move is to take the pawn with the pawn, and white continues with knight c to e4. We're not that far away from the opening, and every move basically so far was kind of forced. After knight c to e4, we have just too much attack. Well, we have an idea of taking the knight in order to misplace this king. Look at the king in f6, it's going to be very unsafe. And we also have an ambition of keeping control of the open file, preventing the natural development of this knight to d7. And if the knight will develop to a6 in the future occasion, we will have a rook or a queen, major piece, probably a rook, controlling the open file. So now there's two moves. Let's say, for example, d5, just to make an example. We can take king takes, and then we go queen c3 check, and the game is over. After king e7, queen b4 wins. I mean, if the king goes back to dark square, we can take the rook. If the king goes back to the e5, we can attack it with the rook, and the queen blocks, then we do have a check with the rook. The king will have to go to d7 in order not to lose the queen, but then we can infiltrate with the queen to b7, and we have a sacrificing idea in order to win the queen if the queen were to block. So in this position, the other idea instead of d5 could have been knight takes knight, and after knight takes knight, now only play d5 in order to prevent white's domination of the open file. Queen takes, rook takes is just completely winning for white. After d5, queen c3 again check. This time this move can be met by f6. Black seems to be getting some more freedom for the rook and more defense for the king. White continues with knight c5. Best move by black now is queen to f7. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. The queen going to the e file is silly because it's going to be attacked again. Queen going to c7 is met by knight e6 winning the game. So queen f7 is the best move. Keeps an eye on the e file, but not being on the e file, also because knight was threatening a fork of these two. Rook h2 e1. Now the knight truly is threatening to go to e6, and after king g8, best move, white continues with rook e2, very quietly doubling up the rooks and reaching the 7th rank. How to react against the pawn attacking the knight? We simply play rook to e1 because we're threatening to trap the queen. So even if black doesn't take the knight and does something about his queen like g5, we still have the same plan. We just have so much tempo ahead. A move like knight to d7 in this position loses a pawn. There's no compensation for losing this pawn. And then the knight can go back to two candidate squares, c5, d6. Yeah, white's plan of continuing the development of the rooks goes on. White's advantage is good enough and goes to a winning endgame. Alright, last recap, just to mention a scenario that I was supposed to mention already. Queen e5 check, bishop e2, bishop g4, and d4. What happens after the queen moves back, keeping the pin? Now white continues with f3, attacking the bishop. The bishop has to move, and either way, after let's say bishop h5, we play g4, bishop g6, only move not to lose a piece, and white continues with f4, going for the cheeky f5 move. And f5 does trap the bishop, so the queen can't really move anywhere. d5 is controlled, e4 is controlled, and then c6 going for the rook, for example, is simply met by bishop b5, and so that's game over. So after f5, which is the move the computer plays, and obviously a move that you clearly have to play to save these two from being forked by the pawn, white continues with knight to f3. White has 3 minor pieces developed, and black has only the queen and a very, very ugly bishop developed. White has an idea of going to g5 with the knight harassing the queen. So what happens after pawn takes, knight g5? Queen has to move, let's say queen to d6, and white continues with castling. It doesn't look like a very safe castle, but white's development is complete. And white queen is misplaced because it's going to get attacked a few times. So after, let's say, for example, h6 attacking the knight, white ignores that and plays knight to b5. Like white's development is much better. We've got 2 pawns in the center, 3 minor pieces developed. Black is still moving the queen again and will have to keep an eye on the square c7. So after queen to d7, we could play a move like knight e6. We could have played that anyway, even if the queen had picked another direction, but knight e6 is just well placed, because since we have a knight in b5 with attack in c7, this queen cannot take the knight due to the fork. So this attack on c7 is now unstoppable. Knight a6 doesn't work, because now white continues with f5, attacking the bishop, and then it gets ready to play bishop f4. Best idea by black now will be to get rid of one of the knights after bishop f7, and white continues with bishop f4. Black can take this extremely strong knight in e6, but then pawn takes back, and now the queen has to move. Obviously this pawn is also another super strong asset of the white player. So after queen takes, white now takes the pawn in c7, and of course the knight cannot take back. Best move by black now is knight to f6. And let's close the line here with this idea. Let's discuss bishop e3 and let's assess the situation we're in. Black has a bishop that cannot be developed without a disaster. This knight is stuck in a6. It cannot move because otherwise it cannot take the bishop, and moving will just create a weakness in c7, which is really dangerous when we move our bishop. This rook isn't really able to develop anywhere, and this rook is blocked, so there's no attack going on. And just a lot of central squares are controlled by white pieces, so black doesn't really have an attack. The advantage is about plus 650, but there's just too many moves now that can be played that I don't want to go too far. I think we're fine after we've reached such an advantage. Last recap. So back at the initial position, after d4 and queen moves, keeping the pin, we play f3, bishop moves, g4, bishop moves, f4, and then f5 to stop the pawn fork. Now we play knight f3. Earlier we went through pawn takes and then knight g5 and all the forced moves that come afterwards. What happens after a normal move like knight f6? White continues with d5. Just pay attention to the fact that this bishop here had to move a lot of times, so now it's blocking the fianchetto square, and also the queen in e6, in order to keep the pin, is also smothering the bishop, so the dark square bishop is not playing. White continues with d5, attacking the queen, and now the queen has to move. The best square, crazy enough, is queen to c8, and now white continues with pawn to g5, attacking the knight. So white's advantage is already quite good. After knight h5, for example, then knight e5 wins. The knight is trapped, we got just too much attack on it. And after knight to e4, we can take the knight, pawn takes back, and now knight to d4. White's position is so much better after the knight manages to go to the square e6. The knight is there to stay and to support the bishop in g4. So after bishop to f7, for example, white continues with bishop to g4, and the control that this d5 pawn has on c6 and e6 is crucial, and it's the main thing you have to remember in this variation where the queen plays queen to e5 check and then goes back to e6. After bishop to g4, best move by black is queen to d8. Of course, the pawn cannot go down because we have too many attackers. So after queen to d8, white continues to play knight to e6, and black's development is impaired forever. Black's best move is bishop takes, of course, but then white takes back with the bishop. This bishop is a god. And of course, this pawn here supporting the bishop can be supported further by pawns, so we're going to leave it there. So let's make one last mention in this variation of the g5 move. We're only at move 11 in a very forced variation. What happens after the knight goes back to d7? White continues with bishop to e3, and an idea of developing the pieces normally, like queen to d3, long castle, but also h4, h5 is an idea. Removing the bishop from the defense of f5, exploiting the fact that we have a pawn in d5 preventing black's development from e6, and the bishop in g6 is stopping the development of the dark square bishop from fianchetto. White has control over too many central squares with all these pieces and pawns. So a move like c6, which is the only move in order to allow black to do something, because black can't move anything right now. After c6, white continues with queen to d3. Black's best move now is to take this pawn, which will allow also black's ambition of being able to develop the dark square bishop. White continues with queen to d5, stopping that, and keeping an eye on f5. White position is +5, so we're going to end the line here. You figure out to continue your games because there's too many moves now that are possible. I mean, most of them are mistakes, right? There's a lot of stuff that if black were to move, that would lose. Bishop can't really move without losing control of the f5 pawn. This pawn can't move. This pawns can't really move without being lost. Neither the rook can move. So, but there's a lot of stuff that, a lot of things that black can choose to play. Although the endgame should be easy life for white. An idea here could be knight to b6 attacking the queen. This is met by bishop takes, and after pawn takes back, white has created another weakness in the black's territory and goes on to long castle and enjoys this excellent position also because black can't develop anything. Queen can't move without being taken with checkmate. Queen to d7 will run into bishop e5, pinning the queen, and knight c6 doesn't really save because then the queen has full access over d7. White is willing to play bishop b5 in the future anyway. After a move like knight to d7, for example, we can keep building pressure. We also have knight e5.